Gaslighting is a manipulative tactic where the perpetrator systematically undermines the victim's perception of reality. It often begins subtly, with the gaslighter questioning the victim's memory or judgment, then escalates to outright denial or distortion of events. Gaslighting can lead to profound self-doubt and confusion in the victim, as they struggle to reconcile their own experiences with the gaslighter's version of reality. The gaslighter may use tactics like trivializing the victim's feelings or experiences, making them doubt their sanity, and ultimately gaining control over their thoughts and behaviors. Over time, gaslighting can have devastating effects on the victim's mental health and well-being, leaving them feeling isolated, powerless, and dependent on the gaslighter for validation. Guilt-tripping manipulators exploit the natural human tendency to feel guilt by using it as a tool for control. They may employ various tactics, such as reminding the victim of past favors, exaggerating their own suffering, or blaming the victim for the manipulator's problems. Guilt-tripping creates a sense of obligation in the victim, compelling them to comply with the manipulator's wishes in an attempt to alleviate their guilt and restore harmony. The manipulator may also use guilt to manipulate the victim's perception of themselves, convincing them that they are inherently flawed or unworthy. This tactic can be particularly insidious because it preys on the victim's empathy and desire to maintain positive relationships, trapping them in a cycle of guilt and compliance. Isolation manipulators isolate their victims from their support networks to increase dependency and control. This isolation can take various forms, from subtle manipulation to outright prohibition of contact with friends and family. The manipulator may use tactics like spreading rumors or lies about the victim, creating rifts in their relationships, or instilling fear of social rejection. Over time, the victim becomes increasingly dependent on the manipulator for social interaction and validation, reinforcing the power dynamic between them. Isolation not only deprives the victim of external sources of support and validation, but also makes it easier for the manipulator to exert control over their thoughts and behaviors. Love bombing is an intense and overwhelming display of affection, attention, and admiration designed to captivate and disarm the victim. Manipulators use this tactic to create a sense of euphoria and dependency in the victim, making them more receptive to the manipulator's influence. Love bombing often involves grand gestures, lavish praise, and declarations of undying love, which can be highly seductive and intoxicating for the victim. However, once the victim is emotionally invested, the manipulator may withdraw affection or use it as leverage to control the victim's behavior. Love bombing can create a cycle of idealization and devaluation, where the victim's worth is contingent upon their ability to fulfill the manipulator's needs and desires. Playing the victim, manipulators often portray themselves as victims to elicit sympathy, deflect blame, or manipulate others into meeting their needs. They may exaggerate or fabricate stories of hardship or injustice to garner support and undermine the credibility of their critics. Playing the victim allows manipulators to maintain control over the narrative and avoid accountability for their actions. They may use tactics like emotional manipulation, guilt-tripping, or gaslighting to manipulate others into catering to their needs and desires. This tactic can be particularly effective in eliciting sympathy and support from others, as it taps into their natural inclination to empathize with those who appear vulnerable or victimized. However, it can also be highly manipulative and emotionally abusive, as it exploits the genuine suffering of others for personal gain. Threats or coercion manipulators use threats, intimidation, or coercion to compel obedience and submission from their victims. This can range from subtle psychological manipulation, such as veiled threats or emotional blackmail, to overt displays of aggression or violence. By instilling fear and insecurity in the victim, manipulators ensure compliance with their demands and maintain control over the relationship. Threats or coercion can take many forms, including threats of physical harm, loss of love or affection, or abandonment. These tactics can be particularly effective in situations where the victim feels vulnerable or dependent on the manipulator for their well-being. Ghosting involves abruptly withdrawing communication or contact with someone without explanation or closure. Manipulators use this tactic to exert control over the relationship dynamics and avoid confrontation or accountability for their actions. By leaving the victim in a state of uncertainty and emotional turmoil, the manipulator maintains power and control over the victim's emotions and behavior. Ghosting can be particularly devastating for the victim, as it leaves them feeling abandoned and rejected without any opportunity for closure or resolution. It can also be used as a form of punishment, where the manipulator seeks to punish the victim for perceived transgressions or assert dominance in the relationship. Shaming manipulators use shame as a weapon to control, demean, or belittle their victims. They may criticize, ridicule, or humiliate the victim for their perceived shortcomings or mistakes, undermining their self-esteem and confidence. This tactic allows manipulators to assert dominance and maintain control over the victim's thoughts and behavior. Shaming can take many forms, including body shaming, slut shaming, or moral shaming, and can have long-lasting psychological effects on the victim. It can create feelings of worthlessness, inadequacy, and self-doubt, making the victim more susceptible to the manipulator's influence. Shaming can also be used as a form of social control, where the manipulator seeks to enforce conformity to their own standards or ideals. Triangulation involves manipulating relationships by involving a third party to create tension, competition, or jealousy. Manipulators use this tactic to gain attention, control, or validation while fostering insecurity and distrust among the parties involved. By creating a sense of rivalry or mistrust, the manipulator maintains control over the victim and prevents them from forming meaningful connections outside of the manipulative relationship. Triangulation can take many forms, including comparing the victim to others, spreading rumors or gossip, or flirting with other people in front of the victim. It can create feelings of insecurity, jealousy, and inadequacy in the victim, making them more dependent on the manipulator for validation and approval. Aggressive jokes. Manipulators employ aggressive or demeaning humor to undermine their target's self-esteem and assert dominance. These jokes are often disguised as harmless banter but carry underlying messages of ridicule or belittlement. By targeting the victim's vulnerabilities or insecurities, the manipulator reinforces their own sense of superiority and control. Aggressive jokes can be particularly damaging as they erode the victim's self-confidence and contribute to a toxic atmosphere of humiliation and degradation. Over time, the victim may internalize these negative messages, leading to feelings of shame, worthlessness, and inadequacy. Manipulators may use aggressive jokes to establish social dominance or to deflect attention away from their own insecurities or shortcomings. Emotional blackmail. Emotional blackmail entails manipulating someone's emotions, such as guilt, fear, or obligation, to coerce compliance. Manipulators may threaten to withhold affection, support, or approval unless their demands are met, creating a sense of obligation and dependency in the victim. This tactic allows manipulators to maintain power over their victims and ensure their submission to their desires. Emotional blackmail can be subtle, such as guilt-tripping or passive-aggressive behavior, or overt, such as threats of abandonment or violence. Victims of emotional blackmail may feel trapped and powerless, unable to escape the manipulator's control without facing severe consequences. Projection. Manipulators project their own insecurities, flaws, or negative characteristics onto their victims to deflect criticism and avoid accountability. By attributing their undesirable traits to others, they evade responsibility and maintain a false sense of superiority. This tactic can be particularly insidious as it gaslights the victim into questioning their own reality and perceptions. Victims may internalize the manipulator's projections and blame themselves for problems that are not their fault. Projection can also create confusion and conflict within relationships, as the victim struggles to understand why they are being blamed for things they did not do. Smear campaigns. Manipulators spread false or misleading information to damage someone's reputation, credibility, or social standing. These campaigns aim to discredit, isolate, or control the target while bolstering the manipulator's own image or agenda. By tarnishing the victim's reputation, manipulators undermine their credibility and authority, making it easier to manipulate and control them. Smear campaigns can take many forms, including spreading rumors, gossip, or false accusations, and may involve enlisting others to participate in the defamation. Victims of smear campaigns may feel helpless and overwhelmed, unable to defend themselves against the onslaught of negative attention and criticism. Shifting the goalpost. Manipulators constantly change the criteria or standards for success to control or undermine others. By moving the goalposts, they avoid accountability and perpetuate a sense of failure or inadequacy in their victims. This tactic creates a dynamic where the victim is always striving to meet ever-changing expectations, perpetuating a cycle of control and manipulation. Victims may become trapped in a cycle of self-doubt and anxiety, constantly second-guessing themselves and feeling like they can never measure up to the manipulator's standards. Shifting the goalpost can also create confusion and frustration within relationships, as the victim struggles to understand why their efforts are never good enough. Changing the subject. Manipulators divert attention away from uncomfortable topics or criticisms by changing the subject. This allows them to avoid accountability, derail conversations, and maintain control over the narrative's direction. By redirecting the conversation, manipulators manipulate the flow of information and prevent the victim from addressing important issues or concerns. They may use various tactics to change the subject, such as humor, deflection, or sudden tangents, to shift focus away from topics that challenge their authority or expose their manipulation. Victims may feel frustrated and disempowered as their attempts to address important issues are consistently sidetracked or dismissed by the manipulator. Playing on insecurities. Manipulators exploit their victims' vulnerabilities, fears, or insecurities to gain control or influence. By targeting these sensitive areas, they undermine confidence and foster dependency on them for validation and approval. This tactic allows manipulators to maintain power over their victims and manipulate their behavior to suit their own needs. They may use subtle cues or overt criticism to trigger insecurities in the victim, making them more susceptible to manipulation. Victims may feel emotionally drained and insecure, constantly seeking reassurance and validation from the manipulator to alleviate their feelings of inadequacy. Fake moralization. Manipulators use moral superiority or righteousness to justify their actions while condemning others. By employing moralizing language or arguments, they manipulate, shame, or control others, masking their true intentions behind a veneer of ethical righteousness. This tactic allows manipulators to justify their manipulative behavior while deflecting criticism or accountability. They may use moralizing language to shame or guilt-trip the victim into compliance, portraying themselves as morally righteous while casting the victim as morally inferior. Victims may feel confused and conflicted, struggling to reconcile the manipulator's words with their own sense of morality and integrity. Infantilization involves treating someone as if they are much younger, less competent, or incapable of making decisions for themselves. Manipulators use this tactic to exert control, maintain power dynamics, or undermine the autonomy and independence of their victims. By infantilizing the victim, manipulators reinforce their own sense of superiority and control, creating a dynamic where the victim is dependent on them for guidance and validation. They may use patronizing language or actions to belittle the victim's capabilities and undermine their confidence. Victims may feel marginalized and disempowered, doubting their own abilities and relying on the manipulator for direction and validation.